All right, let's kick off. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew. I'm from BirdLife South Africa, and you're joining us for session 2 of our virtual Avitourism training. A reminder that this is a series that is happening every Monday and Thursday. We had our first session this past Monday on the 30th of October, and our last session will be on the 30th of November. So thank you again for joining live. To those of you who are watching the YouTube recording of this, welcome to you as well. Thank you for taking part in this training course. So I'll run through a few of the details again from the first webinar, because there are quite a few of you who are joining for the first time. You missed last week's live presentation. So just to remind everyone, it's always good to have a reminder of important details. Like I said, this is our virtual Avitourism series. The context of this training is that it's part of a broader project that BirdLife South Africa is leading on developing the garden route and the Klein Karoo as an Avitourism destination or a birding tourism destination. Those of you who attended the first webinar will know exactly what Avitourism means. It was, I think, 100% accurate answering on that question, so well done for that. This particular part of this project is designed as an introductory course for aspirant birding guides and to upskill the supply side of the market. But as I explained in the first session, literally anyone is welcome, whether they come from the area or not, whether they are a guide or an aspirant guide or not. We have a cap of 500 people. We have 150 people registered for this training now, which is absolutely fantastic. But that means we have spots for 350 more people to join. So again, if you do know of people who would like to attend this training, or you think would benefit from attending this training, please do encourage them to do so. So these are the partners for this project. Just to remind you again, I'm from BirdLife South Africa. We also have Roland Forvac from In Toto Retreat, who is our local activator. And then our funders are the Western Cape Government Department of Economic Development and Tourism through the Growth for Jobs Tourism Challenge. And then the Growth Cluster Biosphere Reserve, who are our co-funders and another important local stakeholder, and I guess beneficiary as well for this training. So thank you to all of those who are involved in pushing this project forward. A reminder again to those of you that haven't already to please fill in our baseline survey. This is for the broader project, not just for this aspect, this training, but we do need as many people to do this as possible to get as many voices and opinions and different perspectives on Avitourism in the garden route in Klein Karoo, and what needs to be done at a local level, what has been done, what exists, who the main role players are. All of that important information will come through this baseline survey, and we'll also be using the results of the survey to craft further phases of this project. So it's important that we get those right, that we make the most impact possible. And yeah, we need your assistance in doing that. What I didn't mention last week, because it was sort of in development, I guess you can say, is that there is a lucky draw prize for anyone that enters into the survey, and that will include accommodation and a guided experience. So we'll make an official announcement about exactly what that prize entails very, very soon. We're just getting the final T's and C's laid out, so you can look out for that very soon. So please do fill in that baseline survey. There were a few of you in the last webinar who struggled with the survey and the quiz to use a QR code. So very briefly, for those of you that haven't used a QR code before, if you have a smartphone, and most of us do, open up the photo application or the camera application. Just point it at this code. You don't have to press a button to take a photograph. You essentially just scan it, and it should come up with a prompt on your screen to link away to that website. So QR code is very, very easy to use, and we'll be using them extensively in this training, so do give that a go. All right. I do also send follow-up emails with the links to the quiz, to the baseline survey, to any external resources we've referred to. So if you are still struggling with that QR code, maybe you can't access the form on your phone because you've got a funny device or funny make that doesn't accept this kind of software, then don't fear, we will send out links as well that you can click on your laptop. So I think everyone is familiar with that. All right, so that's our baseline survey. Just to remind you, this is where we're at in our schedule. We're now on session 2 on Thursday, the 2nd of November. And this is a birding and bird ID for beginners session. So we're very lucky to have a guest presenter. We will have guest presenters scattered throughout this program. You won't have to have too much of my voice over the next 5 weeks. And yeah, today is birding and bird ID. And then on Monday, we have a session which has a very long title, but birding equipment, apps, social media, and information sources. And I think this is going to be a very useful one for those of you who are just starting out on your birding journey, just dipping your toe into that massive lake of what is birding. There were a few questions last week related to apps and other information sources. So this is going to be an important one for you to attend and take some copious notes, but don't worry, you always have the recordings. So on that note, if you do miss any sessions, you can go and watch the recordings. Just go to YouTube, search BirdLife South Africa, and you'll find it there. And similarly, just to remind you that you must complete the quizzes at the end of each webinar. So I will be sending the quiz link around at the end of the webinar to everyone who's registered, along with the YouTube link as soon as that's ready. So look out for that and make sure to do the quizzes, because that is the way that we're going to track who's participated in the webinars. We're not relying on the Zoom attendee report. As you saw in the messages in the chat box, there's often 2, 3, 4, 5 people watching to a screen. So we want to credit everyone who's participated in the webinar, and the way we do that is through the quiz. And obviously we also monitor how effective our training has been by the quizzes. And I think the average mark was 8.5 out of 10 on the last quiz for the first webinar. So congrats to all of you. That's an exceptional mark. Well done. So today we have a short presentation. I think it's around 20-25 minutes from Lance Robinson. He's going to be our guest presenter for basic birds and bird identification. His presentation is called Birding Basics: 7 Habits for Highly Effective Birding. Lance is a very well-known character in the birding community. He is the incumbent honorary president and a former chairman at the Wits Bird Club. So Wits Bird Club is one of the biggest in the country. It's one of the oldest in the country. I believe it's celebrating its 75th anniversary next year. So a very long-standing club up here in the Gauteng region, and Lance has been one of the real movers and shakers in that club. He was a past Excom member of BirdLife South Africa as well. He has an honours degree and is FOGASA qualified. He is also one of our recommended course providers. So he is an exceptional person to be teaching us about birding. We're very lucky to have Lance. This is a pre-recorded presentation from Lance that he's previously given at the African Bird Fair, but he's allowed me to reproduce this for us in this virtual training. So if you'll just give me a second while I get that presentation up and shared, we can enjoy Lance's presentation shortly.
Welcome, everyone. We sure live in an amazing region. Southern Africa has over 900 species of birds for you to enjoy. But that's not all. There are various plumage differences between the sexes and even different age groups to consider. You could therefore end up having multiples of 900 to identify in the field. So yes, it can be quite bewildering. The best way to tackle this is to build on a systematic way of approaching bird ID, and this is what this module, part of a beginner's course, is all about. I would like to introduce you to a 7-step system which will enable you to accumulate enough information to identify your bird before you turn to your field guide. The best way to identify birds is to pay attention to as much detail as possible and to use all the clues you can. It really helps to try several of the key steps discussed for every bird, but you need not apply each of these steps each and every single time. Right, so here they come. You may want to make a quick note of these before we unpack each of these steps in the coming slides. So ask yourself, number 1, what is the general size? Number 2, what is the general shape? Number 3, what are the plumage colors and patterns? Step number 4, what color and shape is the bill? Step number 5, what color are the legs? And notice the structure of the feet where possible. Number 6, What habitat is it in? And finally, step number 7, what is its behavior? Look at the bird. I can't say this enough. And let this be your mantra. Birds often don't keep in view for a long time. Many of you might already recognize this bird, although some new birders may not. But for those who know this bird, ask yourself, how well do you really know the features that contribute to its identification? Let's take the approach that you're a visiting birder to South Africa. You're settling in at your accommodation in Cape Town, drinking a cup of coffee on the patio, and a movement catches your eye. Perhaps you are lucky to quickly capture a photograph of the bird at the bottom of the garden, and this could be a useful reference. But let's just say you didn't get the pic, but fortunately it seems quite a confiding bird, and certainly confiding enough for you to take enough time to ID it. Now, how do you go about identifying this particular bird? In this module, I'll share the steps for you to build up your own birdwatching skill set and toolbox. The object of the exercise is to look primarily at size and shape, any color patterns and marking, and also to note behavior. Think of them as clues that you'll mix and match to home in on a positive ID when you encounter an unfamiliar bird. So let's go back on step 1. What is the general size? Well, knowing size is an important first step in identification, but size is relative. What you can probably make out here is the ivy leaves, giving you an idea of overall size in this particular instance. It is, however, more helpful to have benchmark species, well-known birds that many, even non-birders, will be familiar with. The first one that we'll talk about this evening is a sparrow at about 15 centimeters. Number 2 is a dove at about 25 centimeters. And the third benchmark species, another familiar bird, is the guinea fowl at about 55 centimeters. Now, these sizes that I'm referring to are basically acquired from museum specimens and basically are measurements from tip to toe, generally from the beak to the tip of the tail, or sometimes the feet, should they extend beyond that. So our particular bird is sort of in between the sparrow and a dove, and we'll get to this a little bit later. Okay, step number 2. What is the general shape? Beginners often ignore shape. Perhaps they just find it confusing. But I can tell you that everyone can tell some birds just by their shape. If I mention some bird families such as owl, eagle, penguin, or flamingo, you're likely to have a bird shape in mind. But how do you do it? Perhaps subconsciously you've noticed certain details about birds. Is the neck long or short? Is the bill thin or stout? Is the tail long and pointed or short and stubby? And remember, subtle shape differences can also be just as informative as the more obvious ones. Here we are at a typical wetland setting. Do you recognize some of these birds based purely on their shape? And I mentioned some of the birds that I just previously referred to earlier. For example, here is a flamingo, a heron, a duck. Note that we're not going in at specific species identification right now, just getting familiar with birds in the environment. The structure of these birds, in other words, their size, shape, posture, and behavior, is most useful in identification. The key to successful identification is learning how to place an unknown bird into a group of similar species. Here are the silhouettes again of the birds seen on a previous slide. Can you still recognize them, just based on their shape? Step number 3, what are the plumage colors and patterns? Well, color is often the first thing you notice about a bird, and it helps that many birds come in such striking colors. But there are many with less obvious colors, and birders have sidelined them as a group called little brown jobs, the LBJs, or even big brown jobs, the BBJs. So I'm sorry to tell you, birding by color alone isn't enough. Rather, when there is distinctive color, where exactly is it? How much color was there? What other less obvious colors did the bird have? In addition, birds can have very distinctive markings just about anywhere on their bodies. Make a note of these. An example in this slide is the white wing bar on the white-throated robin-chat here on the top left. When you see a bright or prominent color, that rufous orange in this instance, look also for distinctive patterns. Is that patch of color a cap on the head, a patch on the throat, or located on the wing? Or is most of the bird orange? Learn to see the patterns of color. Streaking, stripes, spots, and rings, necklaces, spectacles, and crowns. These are familiar terms to most, and also useful when it comes to birding. Sometimes just the arrangement of the markings can tell you what the bird is, and I'll be touching on the birding lingo in the coming slide. It is imperative that you know or at least be familiar with the parts of a bird to understand key ID features used in the field guides the world over. Most field guides have these covered in the introductory sections. Some are not unlike those terms used with other animals, and some are used for describing human features too. Some are a little more unique to birds though. I recommend that you learn the names of the large, obvious features common to all. For example, rump, vent, nape. Then move on to some of those that pertain to distinguishing features, such as moustache or stripes. So let's go through a couple here on our bird seen at the bottom of the garden. You'll note quite a common feature to many birds is this white region here, which is often referred to as a supercilium or eyebrow. The top of the head as a crown. Birds have internal ears, and often these are covered by feathers, not always that distinguishable in this particular instance, but that is referred to as an ear covert. The nape, or the neck of the bird. The mantle, just before the back. An area just below the back and just before the tail is a rump. The upper tail coverts are depicted as they're in the diagram. The tail, outer tail feathers can sometimes be a useful and distinguishing feature on certain birds. Take a note of the undertail coverts. Basically, the feathers holding the upper tail coverts and undertail coverts are the feathers holding the tail in place. The vent, the flank, that area where the wing at rest comes to rest on the body. The belly, a breast, the throat, and the eye. All right, if we continue this and look at more specifically at the wing, the flight feathers are the primaries, and this is an extended wing. There's also just layers of feathers that generally cover these feathers to keep them in place. Here, there are the greater primary coverts. A small group of feathers referred to as the alula, and that really is a wing-like structure with a couple of feathers, 3 to 5, that functions much like a flap on an airplane's wing. The secondaries, the greater secondary coverts, median secondary coverts, lesser secondary coverts, tertials, and the scapula. Scapulas are essentially shoulder feathers. Okay, step number 3. What are the plumage colors and patterns continued? All right, as I mentioned earlier, there can be plumage differences between species. These may be age or sex related, they may be seasonal, or even there may be even color morphs, such as an all dark plumage. Then there's even geographical variation, with many birds being light in color in the west as compared to the eastern counterparts. Beyond plumage, beware of a term referred to as GIS, G-I-S-S, general impression, size and shape, which references subtle shapes, postures and behaviors, and these really come with field experience. Okay, the first pattern that I'm referring to here is a mottled pattern, which is a variable percentage of black feathers that are tipped with white, as shown in this nightjar. Raptors often depict a lot of barring, and there's some barring in this particular raptor over here. Here is an example of a striped pattern, of a laced pattern, and in this African olive pigeon, a spotted pattern. Step number 4, look at what the color and shape of the bill is. The bill is the whole beak, both upper and lower mandibles. What we're going to look at next is a number of birds and really the shape of the bills that are indicative of their functional design and really help birds exploit their niche in the environment. At the top left, we have a grey heron with a large spear-shaped bill, mainly used for spearing fish. Going right, we have a Cape starling, which has a bill that really points to it being mostly insectivorous. The woodpeckers have sturdy, pointed beaks with a strong base, allowing it to chisel into wood, and also used in their nest hole excavations. Down at the bottom right is a peregrine falcon, and like many birds of prey, has a hooked beak used for tearing flesh. Many of our ducks have flattened broad bills and have lamellae to help filter out water from the food. The southern masked weaver has a short conical bill used for cracking seed. Step number 5, what color are the legs? And notice the structure of the feet. In birds, the typical feet have 3 toes facing forward and 1 facing backward. This is a perfect perching foot. Raptors also have this basic structure, but their toes are stronger, thicker, and they have well-developed strong talons. Woodpeckers, barbets, and cuckoos, they have 2 toes forward and 2 back. This design is often referred to as being zygodactyl, a functional design to help them with clambering. Many terrestrial or ground-living species and wading birds are longer-legged, but often don't need a hind toe, or that toe is much reduced. An ostrich, for example, only has 2 forward toes. Aquatic birds often have feet that help the bird to swim. The webbing in ducks and lobed feet in grebes and coots, which is essentially flaps of skin folds that move forward and fan out as the bird pushes back. And there on the right-hand side is the typical foot of our passerine birds with 3 toes forward and 1 toe facing backwards, used in perching. Right, step number 6, what is the habitat? I'm going to cover this in more detail a little bit later on in the presentation. Step number 7, what is its behavior? What is the bird doing? Okay, it's a little bit difficult to tell in this very static image, but most birds have a characteristic things that they do and things that they don't do. One does not expect a guinea fowl to swim, and ducks certainly don't climb up the sides of trees. Some birds will hop, others will walk, some waddle. Some raise their tails in alarm, and some have distinctive displays, or go about certain ways when they find their food. For example, black herons use a canopy or umbrella technique, sometimes referred to as mantling, for attracting prey. Familiar chats habitually flick their wings, so paying attention to what a bird is doing may be a very good clue for figuring out what it is. Okay, so to fully identify your bird, you're going to need at least 1 field guide. We are very fortunate in South Africa in that we are blessed with a sheer number and variety of field guides on offer, and many birders make use of their personal favorite. So we need to really get to the identity of our particular bird seen at the bottom of the garden. Once you've assigned the bird to the correct group, it's usually fairly easy to identify the species from the field guide. This is an excerpt from the Cecil guide used for illustrative purposes. Through a process of elimination, when you look at the distribution maps and species account, you will come closer to the identification of the bird. As I mentioned, our bird was seen in Cape Town, and by looking at the distribution maps, truly points to our bird being the Cape robin chat. This is often a garden bird, and a firm favorite with many people across the country. Right, now we're going to pick up on point number 6, or step number 6, which we discussed habitats, and I said I'll expand on it a little bit later. And we're also going to do some virtual birding, looking more closely at these various habitats on the screen. Where you saw the bird can tell you a lot. Some birds are only found in grasslands, others only in the forests, and some are only to be found at the tops of mountains. Birds can move around, but most species prefer a particular kind of habitat. Habitat preferences can be very strong during the breeding season. Outside of that period, in some species, the preferences break down and they can be found in a variety of habitats. And migration can really change where you see a bird. And while they're in transit, you might find some birds just about anywhere. These are the recognized key biomes in Southern Africa. We'll talk a little bit about some of them and look at some microhabitats. But never forget your own local patch for some great birding. Okay, the moist savanna. And this is where many of us start when we visit the big national parks like Kruger. And the bird life to be found here is often colorful and spectacular. Think about the vultures, the numerous birds of prey, flashy bee-eaters, kingfishers, shiny starlings, multicolored sunbirds, and many bright weavers. Okay, so just some denizens of this habitat and many that I'm sure you've encountered in your travels there. The southern yellow-billed hornbill, southern carmine bee-eater, chestnut-vented titblabbler, and southern white-faced owl. Next up, we're going to take a look at the grasslands. After wetlands, grasslands are the most threatened habitat in Southern Africa, with large areas that continue to be transformed. Spring and summer can be great, as this is when some of the larks and pipits are in full song and displaying, and this will be really helpful in getting your ID correct. Many endemics or range-restricted birds occur. All 3 crane species and, of course, our southern bald ibis occur in this habitat. Let's just look at some of the birds to be typically found from the grassland region. Long-tailed widowbirds, the African pipit, a classic LBJ, Cape longclaw, and the crowned lapwing. The karoo. The karoo also has a number of endemics, and this, for example, includes the karoo koran and the karoo lark. The arid savanna. The arid Kalahari thornfelt hosts some spectacular species. Some birds occur throughout the woodland biomes, but others are more localized. Some have plumages that blend into this environment, but then there's the crimson-breasted shrike. And if that bird doesn't make you a birder, well, I just don't know. Next up is the fynbos, the celebrated Cape floral kingdom. Smallest of the world's 6 floral kingdoms, with loads of threats from invasive aliens like wattles. In the fynbos, we have 7 endemic species: the Cape sugarbird, the orange-breasted sunbird, Cape siskin, fynbos buttonquail, Cape rock jumper, Victrin's warbler, and Proteus seed eater. Here are some typical birds to be found in that region, but not necessarily all of them being endemic to the fynbos. Right. Next up, we're going to discuss the forest, and we've split these into the lowland forest and Afromontane forest. This is really the smallest biome in a region, but supports many highly sought after and rather spectacular birds. The tree height makes birding the canopy difficult, and many birds here are secretive, so your call knowledge is very important. Also, why not consider hiring one of the trained BirdLife South Africa guides to show you some of the specials? Here are just some examples of birds to be found in lowland or coastal forests: eastern nicketer, grey cuckoo shrike, olive sunbird, and the spectacular crowned eagle. Here we'll look at some of the birds of the montane forests, like dark-backed weavers, lemon doves, chorister robin chats, and white-starred robin. Right, next up we have Cliffs Koppies Mountains, the higher regions. These areas include some of my favorite birds, which include the Vero's eagle, Drakensberg rock jumper, African rock pipit, another classic LBJ, best identified on its call and through this habitat of these higher lying regions, and the alpine swift. Urban and suburban environment. Many of the familiar birds that we found in our gardens and it includes some introduced species, for example, the common myna. Just about everywhere in the country has some sort of bulbul. Dark-capped bulbul seems to be almost ubiquitous, but if you're down in the Cape, you'll get the Cape bulbul, and if you're in the drier western regions, the African red-eyed bulbul. Our spectacular and often overlooked laughing dove, and the southern masked weaver. Freshwater wetlands are mostly concentrated in the eastern half of South Africa due to the rainfall. Many large number of birds aggregate, and this can be one of the best places to visit when you first start out. Many bird sanctuaries are included in such areas, and many of the reserves have bird hides. Just some denizens of this environment include the Levalent cisticola, an African reed warbler, African wattled lapwing, common waxbill, and little grebe. We look at streams and rivers, where you may be lucky enough to encounter the common sandpiper, a summer migrant, the giant kingfisher, which is resident, African pied wagtails, and African black ducks. The estuaries. Estuaries and protected bays attract many birds, including many migratory waders, gulls, terns, and shorebirds. And yes, just some of those on offer: common greenshank, swift tern, the kelp gull, and the western osprey. Some examples of some coastal species include the white-fronted plover, Cape cormorant, ruddy turnstone, the African oystercatcher, and BirdLife South Africa's bird of the year, the Cape gannet. Okay, then there's some pelagic birding. This is birding beyond the continental shelf. It really is a spectacle of birds, and you will encounter birds not often seen unless you go out on one of the organized trips to see some of the approximately 60 species in our region that can really only be seen out at sea. These may include a Wilson storm petrel, Corey shearwater, the black-browed albatross, and the fantastic pintada petrel. Some of the birders were fortunate enough to make the Flock to Marion trip arranged by BirdLife South Africa in January and connected with a couple of these birds. Well, folks, that really brings me to the end of the presentation, and I'd like to make specific note of thanks to the photographers who made their images available, and then a special word of thanks to Philip Tarberton, who put the slide deck together. Please feel welcome to contact me if you'd like to know more about the full Birding Basics course and other courses that we offer. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you out in birding one day. Thank you.
All right, so that was Birding Basics with Lance. I hope that was interesting and useful. I think there was a lot of information in there, and I think I need to set everyone some homework of opening up their favorite bird book and reading the first few pages of introduction. So I think a lot of people skip straight to the bird accounts, but a lot of that information around the basics of bird identification, habitats, bird behavior, all of that is covered quite well in the popular field guides in South Africa. So that's your first piece of homework. Go and read the introduction to your bird book. I think you'll find a whole lot of new information. And if you have read it before, go back and read a different bird book, because that will have slightly different focuses. And then your second piece of homework, I think, is to go and apply these skills that you've just learned about ID. Go out on a walk, go out into your garden and try and identify 10 birds and take special note of the different steps that Lance went through, from color to shape, behavior, patterns, whatever it takes to get an ID on that bird. So go and do that. I can guarantee you can find at least 5 to 10 species in your immediate area. And if you haven't done that before, you'll be amazed at the diversity that you have right around your area. Okay, so that was the identification webinar. We do have the question and answer box if there's anyone who would like to ask some questions. I'm going to be hanging around for that. You're very welcome to. Other than that, all there's left to say is we'll be sending around the quiz link very soon, as well as the YouTube link for this webinar. So look out for that. Also the baseline survey QR code that you saw earlier, I'll send around a link for that if you haven't filled it in already, and also make sure you put your contact details for that prize that I mentioned. That's quite exciting, and I'm looking forward to sharing the details of that with you soon. So I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A box, so I suppose everyone's already out birding and putting these new skills to practice, or Lance gave such a good presentation that he was just so clear and concise that no one has any extra questions. Just a note from me, I think one of the things Lance touched on at the end with habitats, and he went through the habitats of the country, it was just a great reminder to me, seeing how many of those habitats were relevant to the garden route and the Klein Karoo, and what incredible diversity we're lucky to have in this area, and that you're able to enjoy and explore. So, you know, from fynbos to the mountains, to the coast, to the estuary, to the freshwater bodies, to the Karoo, just such incredible diversity of birds and habitats to explore. So I hope you feel very, very lucky after seeing the presentation, and I hope you feel excited to go and put your new skills to use. So yes, that's it from me then. I do see there are 2 questions. Heidi just saying that Lance did a really great job, especially for her as a beginner. Glad to hear that. Lance is a very excellent course provider, I agree. And then Angela says, hi, I only saw the questionnaire about the course, not the first quiz. Okay, so what I will do then in that follow-up email to everyone, just as a reminder, so thanks Angela for bringing it up, is I'll put the quiz link for this webinar, but I'll also put the quiz link for the first webinar as well, just to make sure that you have both of those if you are tuning in for the first time. All right, excellent. Thank you, everyone. And I'll see you again on Monday. Enjoy your weekends and see you then.